Officer Jared Moss had the passenger door of Damon Harper's pickup open before Sergeant Eric Danner could name a single thing that had been stolen. At Pump 4 of Red Clay Fuel and Market, a folded blanket, a first aid pouch, 2 road maps, and a canvas tool bag were already on the concrete. Damon stood several feet from the driver's side with his hands visible. His identical twin brother, Silas Harper, remained near the rear quarter panel. Neither man had been accused of taking anything specific. 20 minutes earlier, the brothers had pulled off the interstate for fuel and coffee. Damon's dark blue pickup was almost 15 years old. Road dust covered the lower panels, and one corner of the rear bumper carried a dent from years earlier. That was fine with Damon. The truck did not attract attention. For the past several months, he had been working undercover on a federal investigation called Operation Harbor Line. The case involved complaints that certain local officers had repeatedly turned vague business owner suspicions into vehicle searches and questionable property seizures. Only a small FBI team knew Damon's role. Silas knew even less. That was deliberate. Silas worked as a United States district judge, but he was traveling in jeans and a plain navy sweater with no court staff and no government vehicle. A brown leather portfolio rested beside him on the bench seat. They were supposed to be home that evening for a family gathering. Red Clay Fuel was supposed to take 10 minutes. Inside the store, owner Frank Dalton watched Damon approach the register. A white customer had paid for coffee moments earlier. Frank had barely looked up. With Damon, he asked about the pickup before entering the fuel amount. "That yours?" "Yes." "You boys from around here?" "No." Frank looked through the front window toward Silas. "What are you hauling?" "Nothing unusual." Damon placed cash on the counter. 40 on Pump 4. Frank still did not reach for the register. "We've had property problems around here." Damon waited. Frank nodded toward the truck. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Damon's answer stayed polite. "No, thanks." Frank's face changed slightly. "Why not?" "Because it's my vehicle." That was the entire disagreement. Damon paid. The brothers walked outside. Behind the counter, Beth Kincaid stopped restocking cigarette cartons when Frank reached beneath the register and pressed a red direct dial key. She had seen him use it before. It connected directly to a county law enforcement contact line. Frank told the person on the other end that 2 men in an old pickup had refused to let him inspect the vehicle. Then his wording changed. He said there might be stolen property inside. Beth looked toward him. Frank had not mentioned any stolen item before the call. She almost said something. Instead, she went back to the cartons. Several minutes later, Sergeant Eric Danner arrived with Officer Jared Moss. Damon recognized Danner immediately. The name had appeared more than once in Harbor Line material. Damon gave Silas one brief look. Silas understood enough not to ask questions. Danner spoke with Frank first. Frank repeated that the brothers had acted suspicious and refused to let him inspect the truck. Danner did not ask what property was missing. He did not ask who owned it. He walked directly toward the brothers. "Step away from the vehicle." They did. Licenses came next. Damon handed his over. Silas did the same. Jared carried them toward the cruiser. Danner looked inside the pickup through the passenger window. "What didn't you want him seeing?" Damon answered calmly. "We didn't agree to a private search." Danner looked at him. "That make you nervous?" "No." Silas spoke from several feet away. "There hasn't been any report of stolen property." Danner turned toward him. "We're checking that now." Then he told Jared to open the truck. Silas responded immediately. "We do not consent to a search." Jared paused. Danner did not. "Proceed." The passenger door opened. The blanket came out first. Then the medical kit. Then the maps. Jared reached behind the seat and found Silas's leather portfolio. He opened it. Several organized legal papers slipped loose and scattered across the concrete near the pump island. Silas stepped forward. "Please leave those alone." Danner moved between him and the papers. "Stay where you are." A passing customer slowed. Another turned toward the scene. Tara Jenkins, waiting beside a sedan at the next pump, took out her phone but did not start recording yet. Jared finished checking the rear compartment. He stood and looked toward Danner. "Nothing here I can identify as stolen." Damon watched Danner's face. That should have ended it. Instead, Danner looked back into the pickup. Keep going. Damon said nothing. He no longer had to wonder whether Harborline had been studying a theory. The mechanism was happening in front of him. Jared Moss carried Damon Harper's license back from the cruiser. Both clear. Sergeant Eric Danner barely looked at him. No warrants? None. Vehicle? Registered to Damon Harper. Danner glanced toward the pickup, where the passenger door was still open and Silas Harper's papers lay near the pump island. Nothing in the basic records supported Frank Dalton's suspicion. The search continued anyway. Jared opened the canvas tool bag and checked each compartment. Wrenches, electrical tape, jumper cables, work gloves. Nothing stolen. He moved to a small storage box behind the seat. Silas watched from several feet away. Are we free to leave when you finish? Danner looked at him. We're still investigating. What theft? Danner did not answer that question. He pointed toward Damon instead. Keep him there. Jared stepped closer to Damon. Damon remained where he was. Across the lot, Tara Jenkins started recording. She had watched the officers remove items from the truck and had heard Jared say the licenses were clean. Her camera stayed wide enough to capture the pickup, the officers, and Frank standing near the store entrance. Inside, Beth Kincaid could hear most of the exchange through the open door. Frank stood beside the register, pretending to check receipts. Beth moved closer. You never said they stole anything. Frank kept his eyes on the window. I said they were suspicious. You told the police there might be stolen property. Frank lowered his voice. They wouldn't let me look in the truck. Beth stared at him. That isn't the same thing. Frank did not respond. Outside, Jared finished the second storage compartment. He closed it. Still nothing. Danner looked irritated now, not relieved. He walked to the driver's side and leaned into the cab himself. Damon recognized the pattern. A weak allegation had produced a search. The search had produced nothing. Instead of ending the encounter, the lack of evidence was creating pressure to search more. That exact sequence appeared in Harborline interviews. Damon had read it in statements from motorists. Now he was standing inside it. Danner came back out of the truck. You two carrying anything that belongs to somebody else? No, Damon said. Anything you didn't pay for? No. Danner looked toward Frank. Frank avoided Damon's eyes. Silas nodded toward the scattered papers. Can I collect my documents now? Not yet. They have nothing to do with the vehicle. They came out of the vehicle. Silas stopped there. Arguing would not change what Danner had already decided. Jared approached Danner near the hood of the patrol car. His voice was lower now. What do you want me to put for the hold? Danner glanced toward Tara's phone before answering. Caller reported possible stolen property. Investigation ongoing. Jared hesitated. But we haven't identified any stolen property. Then write that we're still determining ownership. Damon heard enough. The reason had not become stronger. Only the paperwork had. Tara shifted her position and kept filming. Beth finally stepped outside. She carried the fuel receipt from Damon's transaction. Frank noticed her immediately. Beth, go back inside. She did not. A county patrol supervisor had just arrived in a separate unit after hearing the stop had lasted longer than expected. Beth walked toward him. I work here. The supervisor looked at her. Did you see what happened before the call? Yes. Frank stepped forward. She doesn't know anything about this. Beth kept speaking. They paid for fuel. Mr. Dalton asked to look inside their truck. They said no. The supervisor waited. Did you see either man take anything? No. I think that was no. Did Mr. Dalton tell you something was missing? No. Frank's face tightened. They were acting suspicious. Beth looked at him for the first time since walking outside. That's not what I saw. The supervisor turned toward Danner. Do we have anything besides the caller's concern? Danner pointed toward the truck. We're in the middle of a property investigation. That wasn't my question. Damon noticed the change immediately. For the first time, someone with local authority was separating the allegation from the evidence. At the same time, a gray sedan pulled into the far side of the lot. Claire Wexler stepped out with one other federal agent. No marked vehicles followed them. No one announced their arrival. Claire looked once at Damon, then at the open pickup and the items on the pavement. She walked directly to the patrol supervisor. I need to know the factual basis for the search. Danner turned toward her. And you are? Claire showed her credentials briefly. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Danner's expression changed, but Claire did not look toward Damon again. She asked the supervisor a simpler question. What observed conduct connects anything in that truck to a reported theft? Nobody answered. Jared looked down. Frank remained near the doorway. Beth still held the receipt. The supervisor ordered the search stopped. Only then did Claire step closer and speak quietly enough that the customers could not hear. Damon Harper is an undercover federal agent assigned to an active investigation involving this unit. Danner stared at Damon. Damon did not reach for a badge. He looked toward the store instead. Claire followed his eyes. Do you recognize Dalton's number from Harbor Line? Damon answered once. Yes. That changed the scope of the morning. Operation Harbor Line changed direction before Damon Harper left Red Clay Fuel and Market. Claire Wexler did not begin with Damon's FBI credentials. She began with Frank Dalton's phone records. The red direct dial key beneath his register had connected to the same county unit 18 times during the previous 14 months. Most calls involved routine problems. 6 ended with vehicle searches. 4 produced no citation, arrest, recovered property, or verified offense. Sergeant Eric Danner had supervised 3 of those 4. Claire kept the review narrow. Investigators compared what Frank actually reported with what officers later wrote. Beth Kincaid supplied the clearest account from that morning. Frank had watched Damon and Silas Harper buy fuel. He asked to inspect their pickup. They refused. Frank had not seen either man take property. Nothing had been reported missing. By the time Danner arrived, that refusal had become a suspected stolen property complaint. Tara Jenkins provided the original video from her phone. It captured Jared Moss reporting clean licenses and valid registration while the pickup remained open. The store camera supplied another comparison. Minutes before Damon entered, a white customer had carried 2 large tool cases through the same checkout area. Frank processed the sale without asking who owned the equipment, where the man was going, or whether he could inspect the vehicle. With Damon, those questions came before Frank even entered the fuel payment. The county review later cited that difference directly. Jared gave a separate statement after obtaining counsel. He confirmed that Danner authorized the search without identifying a stolen item, a victim, or an independent observation connecting the pickup to a crime. He also confirmed that nothing found during the search strengthened the allegation. Jared received an unpaid suspension and was removed from vehicle search assignments until he completed remedial legal training and passed a new search authority review. Danner faced the Civil Service Board. The written decision sustained the complaint for authorizing the search without an independent factual basis and continuing the detention after the records returned clean. It added a separate finding on unequal enforcement. Danner had accepted a white customer's explanation around the same property without demanding verification, then treated Damon and Silas's refusal to allow a private search as evidence against them. The board permanently removed Danner's supervisory rank. He lost the additional pay attached to that position. His authority to approve vehicle searches was withdrawn, and he was barred from field command. Danner appealed. The decision was upheld. Operation Harbor Line continued separately because the investigation had begun before the gas station encounter. Danner's conduct that morning became evidence in that case, not the reason the case existed. Frank faced consequences outside the police department. County officials terminated the direct merchant contact arrangement that had allowed his store to reach the same patrol unit through the Red Key. Investigators also identified 2 earlier motorists whose searches began with complaints Frank could not support with an observed theft. Both received formal notice that the county no longer stood behind the original search justification. Their civil claims were settled through the county and the station's insurer. Frank's insurer later declined renewal under the existing ownership structure. He sold Red Clay Fuel before the end of the year. Damon's FBI status became public during the federal proceedings. By then, it changed nothing about whether the search had been lawful. The licenses had been clean. The registration had matched. No stolen property had been identified. Those facts existed before anyone at the gas station knew his job. Silas Harper's position came out differently. At a preliminary federal hearing several weeks later, Chief Judge Mary Ann Holt presided. Silas entered through the witness door in a dark suit. The courtroom clerk called him by name and title. Danner looked up. Silas took the witness chair. The court record stated that Judge Harper had recused himself from every proceeding connected to the incident because he had been present during the search. He described what happened at Pump 4. He answered questions from both sides. He made no recommendation about punishment. When his testimony ended, he left the witness chair and sat nowhere near the bench. The county changed its dispatch and search procedure after the administrative review. Private callers now had to separate what they personally observed from what they suspected. A refusal to consent could not be entered as evidence of theft. Before officers expanded a property complaint into a vehicle search, they needed an independent fact connecting the person or vehicle to a reported item or offense. Repeat callers, whose reports repeatedly produced searches without verified crimes, were subject to source reliability review. Several months later, Red Clay Fuel reopened under different ownership. A technician removed the private line connected beneath the register. The red key remained in the counter for a few days because taking out the switch would leave an open hole in the panel. Customers could still press it. It still clicked. Nothing happened. This story is fictional.